Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around I'm using my new camera, but I'm doing comfort horror films. Movies I like watching, movies that are great, movies that I recommend, which are horror related. I've got an enormous stack of them over here on my left. The point of that is that they're recommendations from me. They're things I'm going to watch myself. They're things I like. Some of them are local, some of them are old favourites, some of them are things you know, some of the things you don't know. So let's get started with John Landis's first film, a horror comedy, which isn't great, but is kind of amusing. Schlock, about a human-sized ape that runs amok. It's a silly movie. It's a silly movie that was made on an incredibly low budget, but still, it was the start of John Landis's career. It has that kind of anarchy John Landis humour to it. This is the, who put this one, Arrow edition, alternative artwork on it. But yeah, this one is in that kind of late 1960s, early 1970s humorous horror film mode. And I think it's a good way to start. If you're going to do horror movies all through October, you're going to have some palate cleansers. You can't just go from Saw to Martyrs and just keep on the kind of torture porn thing. You got to drive yourself mad. You need some palate cleansers, and Schlock's a good one to do. First saw this one on VHS, and I still like it, and I'm going to watch it this month. Next one's a bunch of Japanese movies that were made by, I think Dai did them, and Arrow put out 3 of them. There's 100 Monsters, Spook Warfare, along with the Ghosts and the Great Yokai War. They're all Japanese mythology-based movies about yokai, the Japanese spirits and Japanese ghosts. And most of them, and all but one of these movies, is from the 1960s, so they've got practical special effects done in a traditional Japanese style. So in a lot of cases, the monsters we see and their locations look like old Japanese prints, and that's kind of marvellous. So there's some of the artwork of the movies. That's disc 100 Monsters and disc 2 Spooky Warfare along with Ghosts. And then we have Takeshi Miike's The Great Yokai War. These are great fun to watch because you get these weird monsters like the Umbrella Man, weird Japanese yokai monsters. And in fact, in Tokyo, they've opened a yokai museum. And just to give you an idea of the kind of thing you're going to get on these, there's this enormous kind of guide to the different monsters in there, and it's double-sided. I mean, I like yokai and I like Japanese mythology in general, but this box set, if you can find it around, is going to be a great buy for the holiday season. You also get a booklet in this, but the Yokai Monsters collection, like I said, comfort horror films, and it will take you down a rabbit hole which you may never emerge from. From there, we're going to go with the classic first portmanteau horror film of all time, Dead of Night, from 1946. You got to have this in your collection if you're a serious horror movie fan at all. Fantastic stuff. Of course, the best of it is Michael Redgrave with the ventriloquist dummy. That one is still terrifying, and the acting in it is first class. In fact, the acting in all of this is really great. There's the back of it. Studio Canal put this one out a while ago. Any copy of this you can find is going to be a good night's entertainment. It's a classic horror film. It's one that's essential for any serious horror movie collection. First saw it on late night TV, and all of the best horror movies before a certain date I love, partly because I did see them on late night television, even though there were ads and things like that. The spookiness was there. You're sitting in a darkened room with an electric shadow coming at you. Just the perfect way to see this kind of movie. From there, I've got a whole bunch of Vincent Price movies. Again, this is an Arrow video collection. They seem to put out some fantastic stuff. 6 Gothic tales by Edgar Allan Poe. The Fall of the House of Usher, Tales of Terror, The Haunted Palace, Pit the Pendulum, The Raven, and Tomb of Ligeia. All of these 1960s Poe adaptations are fantastic. And the artwork they have is kind of cool too. Now, these came from the UK. There's the Haunted Palace. That's a particularly good one. But I think the best artwork is the one for the Fall of the House of Usher. Terrific stuff. Again, the movies I first saw on television, but I never saw them in colour because we didn't get colour TV here in Australia till 1975, and I didn't have a colour TV till well into the 1980s. So that is a must-have, and this time of year, it's the kind of horror movie collection that sits well. It's not going to give you nightmares. It's going to be comfort viewing in some ways, but it's still basically horror films. This one I first saw at the State Theatre in Sydney back in the day. I first saw it 73, 74. And right up until the ending, I thought the protagonist would get away, but he didn't. This one is an essential. You don't necessarily have to have this particular edition of it, but I think it belongs in anyone's collection. And it's a good rewatch. It's got incredible rewatchability. The Wicker Man. Christopher Lee in arguably his best role. Edward Woodward. You've got Ingrid Pitts in there as well. Diane Cilento. You've got Brett Eklund, memorably. Has all of the different editions. It's got the soundtrack there, which is a great soundtrack. The folk music in the movie makes it as much as anything else does. There's the final cut. And this one, theatrical and director's cuts. So you've got a whole bunch of choices in this. I know it's very difficult to find this particular version of it these days because it's sold out crazy fast, and I was quite lucky to get it myself. I bought this one myself. I didn't get it from imprint. But The Wicker Man, if you're going to watch horror movies this time of year, I think The Wicker Man's definitely got to be top 30 your list. Incredible movie. Builds its world fantastically. It's got a protagonist who we don't like because he's spiky and self-righteous and has a stick up his ass. But still, terrific movie. It's probably the top of folk horror as a genre. While we're talking about Christopher Lee, this one is incredibly old. I've had it for a long time. On DVD. It's the three great early Hammer horror movies. Curse of Frankenstein, The Horror of Dracula, and The Mummy in a box set. This one, as I said, is quite old. Because people didn't know how to package these things, it's in this weird package here, with the third one packaged like that, and a kind of a booklet in there as well. It's a really awkward packaging. And in the early days of DVDs particularly, they kind of try to go imaginative with the packaging, where the simple way to do it would be to just put 3 discs into 3 slim cases, but they chose to do it that way. Cover art's not bad. There's a few extras, but not too many of them. And I've had the opportunity to upgrade these at various times, but I kind of don't need to. I don't want all the bells and whistles and all the extras and all that kind of thing if it's going to cost me a lot of money on these. I'd rather buy different Hammer movies that I don't have copies of than just keep getting upgraded iterations of the ones I've already got. It's controversial to say that, but I don't mind. This one I've talked about, I've done a video about it. It was filmed locally. In fact, about a kilometre that way is the cul-de-sac of houses that are a feature of this movie. Written and directed by Philip Brophy. It's transgressive, it's body horror, it's got nudity in it, it's over the top, it has a Troma-esque feel in some ways, body melt. Now this one turns up a lot on streaming services. I think it may well still be on Tubi. This is the umbrella release of it. And there are a lot of extras in the umbrella release, which makes it a worthwhile buy. It's about testing drugs on unsuspecting people in a little suburban cul-de-sac, and things don't go well, let's just put it that way. It's actually pieced together from a couple of different stories Philip Brophy wrote. Still a lot of fun to watch. It's kind of post-Ozploitation era, but still a cool Australian horror film. This one's Region B. But if you can find a copy of Body Melt and you're into that kind of Troma aesthetic, you're going to enjoy it. These two I picked up in England 20 years ago. Went into an HMV, found these quite cheaply. They're not the best editions of these movies, but they're so much off to the side as far as horror movies are concerned. It was worth buying them. They're 2 Filipino vampire movies. First one is Blood of the Vampires, which is kind of cool. And it stars Eddie Garcia and a bunch of other people. And it's got that deeply Catholic Filipino aesthetic where the church and God are very much part of the way that they fight vampires. It's very different than a lot of other vampire movies, and you might want to dip your toes into Filipino vampire films, and Filipino horror films in general. And the other one is Blood Drinkers, which again is a kind of, it's like an aristocratic vampire, attacks beautiful women, that kind of jazz. But these are really interesting to watch. Never seen copies of these here in Australia. Then we're going on to a Drew Goddard movie written by Joss Whedon, who is now persona non grata for very, very good reasons. I'm not going to tell you anything about this movie because if you haven't seen it and you're not aware of it, you're probably better off to go in cold. The Cabin in the Woods. Bunch of teenagers go to a cabin in the woods, but nothing is as it seems. And the escalation in here is fantastic. It's got people you might have heard of. Chris Hemsworth's in there as well. Richard Jenkins is in there. Bradley Whitford. Bunch of well-known faces. But there's an escalation to the threat, which is really cool. And the movie starts that escalation fairly early after the goofy teenagers go to the cabin in the woods. They don't muck around spending a lot of time pretending it's one kind of movie when it's another, and then things escalate even more, and then they escalate even more, and then Sigourney Weaver turns up and it escalates even more, and then you get a nihilistic ending. A lot of fun, Cabin in the Woods, and a high recommend from me. If you haven't seen it, you're going to get a lot more out of it than people doing repeat watches, though I have seen it twice, and I got as much fun out of it the second time as I did the first time. Next up, I'm going to do a couple more Australian films. This one, directed by Jennifer Kent, is probably the movie that started the current cycle of Australian horror films punching above their weight. Of course, it's Essie Davis and Daniel Henshaw in The Babadook, about a single mother living with a troubled child in a house. She has a whole bunch of challenges in her life, and one of them becomes a monster which is attached to a really strange children's book. It's incredible, this movie, and it's such a breakthrough film. Jennifer Kent's since gone on to do The Nightingale, which I'm going to be watching for the first time this month. It's a beautifully atmospheric horror film set and filmed in Adelaide, which is the place to go to if you're going to make Australian horror films. There are starting to be a lot of good Australian horror films coming out of Adelaide, including Talk to Me and a few other ones. But The Babadook is the start of that particular cycle of Australian horror, which I'm enjoying still. Things like The Demon Disorder and that kind of thing. These kind of small budget but really interesting Australian horror films are really becoming a feature of the Australian film industry in the past decade, and that one's where it started. This one you might not consider horror, but I do. Sometimes movies are in more than one genre at once. Stars Nathan Phillips. There's a movie called These Final Hours. It's set in Perth, Western Australia, and the other side of the Earth has been hit by a large asteroid, and all life on Earth is going to be destroyed. And the wave of destruction is heading towards Perth, because Perth is the last place on Earth that's going to be destroyed by this cataclysm. There's no way out of it, nothing people can do. And a young guy is determined to go and spend the last hours of human existence with his estranged girlfriend. But then he rescues a young girl played by Angourie Rice, and he gets his self-imposed obligation to take her to be with her parents. And the clock's ticking. That circle of destruction is just zooming towards Perth. And the character goes through an epiphany. It's really good at evoking a kind of apocalyptic end to the world. People are doing anything they like because there are no consequences long term, because there is no long term. Really underrated Australian film that doesn't get spoken about much, but geez, it punches hard. And it is about, right at the end of his life, a man finding his best self. And I like a good redemption movie, and this is really interesting film. Sarah Snook's in it as well. Just an underrated Australian film from the last 12 years or so. Still got a few more to go. Decided I was going to do a little bit of Cthulhu. You've got to chuck a little bit of Cthulhu mythos into any collection of horror movies these days. H.P. Lovecraft's work is in the public domain, so all bets are off. But going back to 1970 for this Arrow video release of the Dunwich Horror, I've talked about this one on the channel. Dean Stockwell's in there, Ed Begley, Lloyd Bochner, Sandra Dee playing the ingenue, even though she's a bit old to play an ingenue. Sam Jaffe's in there as well. Directed by Daniel Haller. Kind of psychedelic, trippy take on the Cthulhu mythos. You got that artwork of the time, which I kind of like. You get all of the big hitters mentioned in there: Cthulhu, Yog-Sothoth. All of them are mentioned in this one. And it's just a lot of fun. Not to be taken seriously at all, even though it does very much take itself incredibly seriously. But the Dunwich Horror is a banger of a 1970 horror movie based on the Cthulhu mythos. 3 things left, but 2 of them go together. These are the cinema cult releases of this, so they're not the best releases, but they're serviceable. The Abominable Dr. Phibes and Dr. Phibes Rises Again. Beautiful, campy horror with Vincent Price playing Anton Phibes. Concept penis who gets disfigured and starts killing off the people who disfigured and killed him in very imaginative ways. And you get a lot of character actors in there. Hugh Griffiths in there, Terry Thomas, directed by Robert Fust. They're just such campy movies that if you're going to do a light-hearted October Halloween watch, these have to be sitting there somewhere. Beautifully stylized, fantastic production design, over-the-top silliness, and I love them for that. Don't think I need to upgrade these, even though these are the cinema cult versions, which are usually DVD versions of it upscaled to Blu-ray. But in spite of that, I don't need to upgrade them, and they are incredibly fun to watch. Last of all, I've got another one that people might not consider to be a horror movie, but it is. Filmed here in Melbourne, 1959, 1960. Gregory Peck, Ava Gardner, Fred Astaire, Anthony Perkins on the beach. This is a horror movie in all but name, because the whole story of Melbourne and Australia being the last place to survive a nuclear war when the radiation clouds are heading south is a horror movie based on a novel by Neville Shute. Big Hollywood production, filmed here in Melbourne with some Australian actors in minor roles. It's a powerful movie. There was a mini-series done around the turn of the century, updating it and remaking it. I don't think it works at all. It's kind of interesting too, because you see Melbourne as it was in 1959. You see the GPO, the post office. You see all sorts of other parts of Melbourne as they were at the time. Notoriously, Ava Gardner said Melbourne was the perfect place to make a movie about the end of the world. But this one's kind of elegiac and sad and tragic. And even though people do stupid things, like Fred Astaire's character does a car race where people don't care if they crash because they're going to die anyway. And Anthony Perkins and his young wife and his baby are there, and he's playing an Australian guy even though he can't do the accent. And then you get Ava Gardner and Gregory Peck as a love interest together. Yeah, fantastic movie. This is a quality release from Imprint. Yeah, the movie, you also get documentary about the making of the film, and you get a booklet as well. So there's a lot of quality here. But On the Beach, because it is a very confrontational movie for its time, there are a couple of them around that beginning of the 1960s. Things like The World, the Flesh and the Devil and On the Beach would make a good double feature, but because it's about the human race screwing himself up and killing the whole planet, it can't not be considered a horror movie from my book. It's a powerful film. It was produced by Stanley Kramer, who always made very confronting movies for the most part. Consider that when you're thinking about horror movies to watch in October, because I think it's a valid choice to make if you're only watching horror movies for at the Halloween season. So there's my big, massive suggestions for horror movies. I think there's a nice range there. There's some various different cultures are represented. The different tones, serious to comedy, are all covered. There's nothing there that's going to really horrify a modern audience particularly, but I think they're all honest horror movies. And yeah, we need that. Before all of the saccharine Christmassy stuff happens, it's good to have a little spooky season before that. I think it leads us into that silliness of Christmas and the mythologies that are part of that. I'm going to do a Christmas video, 2 Christmas horror video, and I've got a few choices for that. These ones are all good value and good movies to watch. I've got some other things I'm going to be watching this month as well, which I haven't seen before. I'm trying to see horror movies I haven't seen before in October, and I'll do videos about those as I see them. So thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. You can also support the channel by becoming a channel member or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/terrytalksmovies. And there are bits and pieces I'll do for the channel, which will show up first for channel members and for Patreon supporters. Until next time, when I'm doing Science Fiction Saturday once more, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch Dean Stockwell go mad, and I'll catch you next time.